All right, you've got 4:02 and you are live.
Okay, April 20th, 2021, meeting of the Community Advisory Board Review Committee. And I'll call the roll. Dave?
Here.
Yeah. Len Carson?
Here.
Murphy?
Here.
Okay, terrific. Everybody's here. So for those council members attending for the first time, and actually it's only John here that I see, and so you're not attending for the first time. I'm glad to have you back, John. Those folks that are watching on YouTube, I'm going to take just a quick minute to explain our process. As I previously stated, the Community Advisory Board invested many hours in the development of recommendations to ensure a safe, effective, and well-considered delivery of services, policing, mental health, support, and more for the community moving forward. It is the review committee's charge to consider each recommendation, to honor the intent of its authors, to determine what is being done currently, what can be done, and what cannot. And for those that cannot, that we have a clear understanding of the legal, contractual, or other impediments. And that is why we've got Personnel Director Katie Butker here and Acting Chief Lieutenant Witzenberg. So welcome to both of you folks. It's also why the committee has compiled a list of recommendations that require legal opinion and shared those with the city attorney, prosecutor, and defense attorneys, and we expect to have the results of their review actually for our next meeting, which is pretty timely, so I think we'll be ready for that. With that, our process will be to take each one of these recommendations in turn, and we'll ask for the input of the personnel director and the acting chief, and then we'll ask for input from those council members that we have in attendance. And at that point, we will then move it to the committee. We'll engage in discussion. We'll vote on the inclusion of the recommendation in the final plan. If there's anything other than unanimous decisions, we will ask that advocates for both sides of the question join us for a follow-up discussion in coming weeks. Timelines will be determined for all the recommendations included in the final document when we finish this first phase of the review. And everybody's clear on that? Everybody's still agreeable to that? Good.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, thank you very much to, it's amazing that we have minutes. So Carrie, thank you so much. So we have minutes, and if you've all received them, I believe you have. You should have. Has everybody seen the minutes? Good. All right. And so we've got minutes for the 6th and minutes for the 13th. For those, again, who are watching on YouTube, the 6th was an organizational meeting, and the meeting of last week, the 13th, was our first in a series as we plow through the review. Any modifications, comments, changes to the minutes that we'd like to see? Yes, go ahead, Len.
So we just got the minutes a little while ago, and I quickly scanned them. I'm just wondering if we could have another week for our next meeting to approve them, because there was things on there that I don't have in my notes.
Mm-hmm.
Or my notes are different than what are in the minutes, and I just want to.
Luke?
Yeah, I would second that. I just recently got out of work and haven't had a chance to do it, to give it a thorough read through.
All right, so
Same.
all in favor of that, I would join the crowd, although I've had a chance to review them, but we'll take a look next week. And with that, we'll move on.
Chair.
Have the minutes gone out to other members of the council?
I don't know. Carrie?
They have not. They went to the committee, as is our usual practice. With
They
your
shouldn't have
permission,
gone out
Chair,
to
I
the
can
entire
forward them
council
out.
yet anyway, until we approve them, because we don't want to send something out that we feel is if something was missed that wasn't in there or something like that.
Okay.
So
Now I'm going to guess. So all approved that we'll move that to next week, and we'll John, once those are approved, we'll get them to everybody on council. There's also final language that I put together. Thank God for YouTube to be able to go back to that for reference on the various recommendations that we went through. Len, I would suspect that if you haven't really had a chance to look at the minutes, probably most folks haven't had a chance to really pore over the details of the final language on those recommendations. And if you'd like, I would certainly entertain the notion of pushing those back to next week as well. Or would you prefer? Go ahead, Luke.
I'm sorry, I was going to make that motion because it's the
Okay,
same.
I'll let you
same
make
thing.
that motion.
So I guess I'm a little confused. What are you asking?
There's a final language that I put together based on last week's efforts. All of the various recommendations have been now included in a document that you should have received with the minutes. It's titled Cabrc Final Language.
Oh, yeah. I briefed that because we just received this a little while ago, so I didn't.
So again, Luke has just made a motion that we push this back so that you all have an opportunity to fully review it. Second on that motion?
Second.
Seconded. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so both of those things will slide to next week's agenda. I will also add to the final language that which we go through today, so it'll be an amended document or an enhanced document, and then we'll get that to you earlier. And that is not on Kerry, that's on me, by the way. Okay, so with that, moving into the agenda, we are looking to get a lot done today, if we can. So we're looking at review of section 2, H, I, J, and K, section 3, A, B, C, and E, section 4, A and C, and section 5, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. That's 17 individual recommendations. If we're able to do that, that'll be great. It'll allow us then to, begin to talk about the legal opinions and that we should have in front of us next week. If we can't, we can't, but that's what I'd like to see we can make happen. That works for all, I hope. Good, all right. So with that, we'll rock and roll. So I'm gonna start just as we had done. I'm gonna read, and we're starting with H in the section, which is the use of force, officer conduct, additional trainings, personnel, and recruitment. And H reads as follows. This board recommends the council encourage OPD to develop policies and procedures to go above and beyond policing best practices. Many members of the board laud the fact that OPD is accredited, New York State accredited police agency, and recognize the significant and ongoing work that goes into being an accredited agency. OPD's policies, to the best knowledge of this board, remain in line with the standards set by NYSAPA. To further strengthen OPD's standing, it must further align use of force procedures with community standards as indicated in recommendation F in this subsection, which is referencing something that has gone before legal review. Section F has. Go ahead, Len.
I'd like to provide a little bit of clarity because I researched this particular recommendation. So to become accredited, they have to follow the Division of Criminal Justice Service, which is under New York State. And they are the ones that set the policies and procedures, if I understand it correctly, from what I've been able to research off the internet. So I guess for me, reading this recommendation over and over, I don't feel comfortable going above and beyond the policies that the Division of Criminal Justice Service has already set in place that we as a department strive to meet. And the way I understand it is that not all departments have this accreditation, that this is feather in the cap, if you will. So I just don't feel comfortable asking our police department to set standards that go above and beyond, because then who would say, well, yeah, those are good policies? I mean, they're following what's been recommended, from this particular agency that New York State controls. And then I also researched the document that was handed down from the governor, the workbook, and that took me to a subsection, which is the U.S. Department of Justice under cops. And so again, another agency that's setting the tone. So I guess for me, I just number one, I wanted to go back to the recommendations that they're listing it as an agency, and that's not correct. It's not the New York State Accredited Police Agency or NYSAPA. There's no such thing as that. It's that our department is New York State accredited through the Division of Criminal Justice Services of New York State. So, you know, this recommendation to me was a little misleading because it created a whole new agency that doesn't actually exist.
Chief, can I bring you into this discussion before we continue? So you've heard Len's comments. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that going above and beyond best practices is, I'm not really sure what that is, because then it's falling outside of best practices. Right? I mean, if we're going to add stuff in, and from where? I mean, the question then becomes, from best practices, there's a lot of different places that may claim to have best practices. I haven't really researched that. But the Department of Criminal Justice or Division of Criminal Justice Services from New York State is the overseeing body that creates the framework in which we live. So going above and beyond that, I'm not really sure how we would frame that. You know, Chief Nayer, when he was here, said that he never wants to be at the tip of the sword, because it puts you in a position where now you're in uncharted territory and potentially opening yourself up for legal jeopardy. So being kind of, middle of the road, it kind of sets us in the area of best practices without being in an experimental position. So I think I understand where Alderman Carson's coming from on this, in that the policies that we adopt are tested and approved, and if we go outside of that, we're not within the framework of best practices.
Right. So, Luke, this is a lot of this is your baby, and I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, and I think, well, I'd like to apologize for the confusion and not catching that in the editorial. I don't mean to be creating additional bureaucracy. But I think the reason that this is a little bit confusing is, I think, because it's referential to a section that we haven't done yet when it references section F. I think it's if I remember correctly, talking about further strengthening standing, or further aligning use of force procedures as well as community standards, that would be set, I believe, by the as of yet established CAB, if I'm remembering correctly, or looking at F in particular, which is something that we have not done yet.
Right.
So I would reckon that it might be most beneficial to the conversation going forward if this is perhaps discussed at a later point once we get legal counsel on section F, which has to do a lot with use of force.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Luke. We're referencing something that we haven't established the legality of yet, and until we've heard the legal opinion on F, notwithstanding the fact that this is referencing something that is vague and maybe even misrepresented, it's probably as important as anything to the conversation that we have a handle on what's being referenced in F in terms of its legality. Dave, did you want to say something? Dave?
Yeah, if I can unmute myself. Yeah, Luke, are you saying that when they were talking about policies and procedures in this paragraph, they were referring to use of force?
I believe so. I believe, since this is referential to subsection F, a lot of these have to do with policies regarding use of force. So I think this is in response particularly to use of force procedure.
Okay, because I read this as slightly different. I read this as policies and procedures, but then also referencing, in addition, referencing procedures around use of force, in which case it has to align with whatever the recommendations were in section F. So I looked at these as two different things, but intertwined. I mean, I would be fine with, I mean, my first instinct was to just wait on this, to have a discussion later. But that being said, I also agree with the lieutenant about policies and procedures that are best practice, that going above and beyond is not, it's kind of, it's subjective. Like, what is above and beyond? It's not objective anymore, and I think that's dangerous territory. But that being said, also, Lieutenant, I have a question for you. How often do the policies and procedures from the New York State level change?
The model use of force policy was changed July of 2020.
Okay,
So,
and I mean, just in
that's-
general, the policies and procedures, is it frequent? And how does that happen when the changes are made? Are you sent changes in an official document, or, because I know what happens with the Department of Health with me.
Right, so the most recent one would be the Attorney General's Office of Special Investigations is tasked with all now lethal force incident investigations for police departments across the state. That has not been changed in my policies as of yet to reflect, but given the most recent incident, we followed the law on that, and that what our policy was. So we actually had a conversation with our labor attorney to make sure that we were in a good place. He said that because we followed the law, the policy doesn't really matter. That's going to be updated. But again, this is, every time I sit down to do something, I get struck by lightning. So in this
How
instance,
how often do you update then our policies and procedures? Do you wait?
well, they're
till,
going
like,
to all be
quarterly, or-
they're going to all be reviewed by me as soon as I have the official helm. And I will make sure that we go through all of the policies and that we're in line for our next accreditation review. Because that's important to me, is to maintain that accreditation. There's been some talk in the past regarding the benefits of accreditation because we don't get an insurance break from it. However, the standards are set so that it is a matter of public trust for us to have the accreditation in place. And I think therein is where the value is that we are maintaining the standards that are set forth by the state for the accreditation program.
And how often, you have to refresh my memory on this because I don't remember, how often do you reaccredit or do the accreditation again?
It's every 4 years, if I'm not
4
mistaken.
years? Okay, but
2024 will be the next accreditation. But
okay,
they change. So if there is a law changed, then we have to then go through and make sure our policies are aligning with the changes in law. So, they're living documents.
Right.
If there is a change or amendment to a policy recommended or mandated by the state, then it has to be built into policy for the city.
I guess what I'm getting at, and thank you for going over that. I'm getting at maybe that might be the direction that, or a direction that we may want to go with this particular section H, to discuss that more. Because as I said before, I don't know that I would agree with above and beyond because I don't know what that means. But maybe it's more of getting a policy of like the procedure we go through to take something that comes from the state, any change, to then putting that into your policy and procedure here locally. That way, it's just a chain to follow. So that way everybody knows.
One of the things that I just had to do was sign off on the current policies and procedures that we have in place and make sure that my name was I had my signature on them for accreditation policy so that they know that these are current and that they are the guidelines to follow, because the former chief is now retired. So that's been put into play. Again, there's stuff that's pending that I'm working on that I really haven't had an opportunity to put into to policy, but is in fact law.
No, I understand. I go through the same thing with the Department of Health, and with us, it comes down from the state. We have to put it in our policies and procedures manual, and you should, of course, you should always do it as quickly as possible, because there's consequences if something happens and it's not there. That's all. So that's all I have on this.
So Len and Luke and Dave, maybe this captures it and you let me know. OPD will institute policies and procedures and maintain standards set by New York State for accreditation. Does that take care of it? Take care of the first part? Go ahead, Len.
Well, I guess I want to shoot this back to Chris. Aren't the policies and procedures overall, aren't they under the Division of Criminal Justice Service? I mean, they
So
follow
there-
the letter of the law, correct? That agency for New York State follows the letter of the law, and your policies and procedures are a direct relationship, like it's a vertical drop from the Division of Criminal Justice.
There are, yes, they developed the framework for us to live in. And there are subdivisions such as New York State Sheriff's Association and New York State Chiefs of Police that will assist with policy development and making sure that policies are up to date. And, we can pull policies from there as far as their verbiage goes, but the framework is set by the state.
So, Mark, to your point, maybe you could use the word framework comes from the Division of Criminal Justice Service of New York State.
Rather than,
And I was like, Dave, I read this as two different things, not two different things, but two subject matters. One was, what are we using as a basis of policies and practices? And then it was added on about recommendation F, which I think we can all agree we're going to attack that particular item.
all right. So Len, if you can insert that word framework here for me in the right place. I have written here, OPD will institute policies and procedures and maintain standards set by New York State for accreditation, and framework should go where?
Well, as the chief just said, the framework comes from the Division of Criminal Justice.
Right, I get that. I'm having a little bit of a problem with the sentence.
Dave?
I wasn't recommending doing anything right now. I wanted to
Hold off
wait
on it?
until we get, I would rather tie this in with F and
That's what
have
I-
a discussion at that point. Because there are two things. It's like we're discussing policies and procedures and then one particular procedure. And the one particular procedure is tied in with F. And I don't see we could hash this out for a long time, but I'd rather discuss it all later.
I'll tell you, I think this is
Something down here that might be helpful.
Yes.
Use of force policy and training is in line with current state legal requirements, which must meet approval by not just the department head, but be aligned with DCJS guidelines, as well as risk management specialists in the city's insurance reciprocal. So I don't know if that helps, but I just wanted to add that in there.
I think it does help. I look at this as being HA and HB, frankly. I look at, to further strengthen OPD's standing, it must further align the use of force procedures with community standards as recommended. I look at that last sentence as almost being, go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say this was a I think Dave has a good point. Having been in on many meetings with the subcommittees, this was a very important point, and I think we should take it as a whole when we hear back from legal from subsection F. In keeping, again, that's just my view. I worked on this pretty closely with folks.
Chief?
Yeah, but Luke, there's a lot of other policies and procedures and best practices besides the use of force. So as F is important, there still are other policies and procedures that need to be part of this and be addressed. And that's where H comes in. I just don't see molding it all together. I see saying, what are we going to use as our best practices and where do we get that from? And then because we've got to do all of the policies and procedures, and then because F is a separate or a standalone recommendation, then we have to figure that one out.
Chief?
If I'm not mistaken, I think part of this goes back to a recommendation regarding a force continuum and some of the issues that were brought forward by having like a continuum chart. That has been problematic. Force continuums have been highly criticized over time. I think this is probably one where we should wait to see what comes back from legal and what their feedback is on it, simply because I think there are some maybe misconceptions as to, and best practices too is kind of spongy because best practices according to who is the question. And under, New York state law works differently than a lot of other laws. And I think a lot of these things come from a national conversation, whereas we may have some local or state differences as far as how things are written into policy.
So with that, Luke, I think you had made the motion that we table this until we have the legal opinion in front of us. And I don't know if we wound up with a second on that motion.
I'll second it, that we wait until legal.
All right. So that's the motion in front of us. All in favor of tabling it until we've got the legal opinion. In the meantime, though, so it's all, that's passed. In the meantime, Chief, the power of the archived internet will allow me to go back and take your statement there and write it for everybody in parentheses so that we've got that to start with next week when we're looking at this. All right. Good. All right. Very good. So moving on then to I in this same section, which is certainly something that council is going to be looking at. And the question I guess I've got for the committee is, we had indicated this as being something that's going to go to council certainly. Do we want to take a crack at it as well, or do we want to leave it for council?
Again, I look at it as it's for full council because it has a financial aspect to it.
So full council. Dave, Luke, your thoughts? Full council?
Well, I mean, we could look at this like any other committee, Len, where we offer up, I mean, we've been voting on all the other ones to forward on, or to at least include. I mean, do we want to have the discussion now? I mean, at some point, we're going to have to iron out how we're doing the timeline of things too.
Yes, when we get done with the document. We can, if you'd like, go ahead, Luke. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, this kind of ties into Katie and I believe Lieutenant also, and forgive me if I'm throwing names in there, Lieutenant, we've had a lot of meetings. We had conversations about ways to help our officers, and these were a couple of the things that came out of it in talking with Katie, and furthering assistance to trying to make things a little bit more competitive to staying within the city. We all know that the state academy or the state police are just right outside the city, and it can be hard to compete. So these were just some ideas that we were trying to brainstorm to make it a little bit more competitive, to make it more attractive for folks to work and live in the city.
Okay, so my recommendation really quickly, Dave, before you go, is that we take this, we have the conversation with it, and we make our recommendation to council, whatever that might be. And I think it's important to hear from Katie on this subject as well. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, my question actually was for Katie. Is there anything that would stop us from offering financial incentives, whether it's bonuses or anything, to any police officer or any employee for that matter, to live within the city? Is that even legal?
Ooh, well, I think that I would have to defer that one for a legal opinion. Honestly, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I will tell you just anecdotally that, I hear from a lot, I know that we're talking about police officers, but in general, one thing I hear from a lot of our employees is that, I would love to live in the city, but I just can't find appropriate housing. So I think that this topic really kind of like, segues into the already recognized housing issue. And I also should say, while I'm off mute, that I think the council would be glad to hear that some of the recommendations we're already doing. We have a tuition reimbursement program negotiated through the PBA contract. We already participate in the public student loan forgiveness program. So there are some things that we're doing, but of course, I always think there's room for improvement. So much to Dave's point, I certainly would be happy to take on the task of looking into a financial incentive for residency. I don't know the legality of it. I won't pretend to, but I can look into it if that's something you'd like me to do.
I think we all.
Can I add one thing, Mark?
Yes.
I mean, I think maybe I want to reverse my opinion before. Maybe we do want to push this onto the council, because this could be a time, we could put this on a timeline of, within a year, we evaluate all the avenues possible to try to improve this.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I'm cognizant of the fact that we have, Luke brought it up last week, I believe, a relatively robust following on YouTube. And as this hasn't been read, folks may wonder what we're even talking about. So I just want to quickly put that out there for the people who are watching this. We're talking about recognizing the importance of our officers also being members of our community. This board recommends that the Common Council explore offering additional assistance and incentives to officers to live in the city, as well as continuing to offer PSLF student loan forgiveness program opportunities and the ability to work towards college credits while on the job. I believe, though, at this point, we're decided that this is a council conversation. Am I right? And if so, do we want to move that we hold this off for council conversation?
Make a motion that we hold recommendation I to full council.
All right. Len's got the motion. Anybody second? Dave. And all in favor then?
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. So to council. Very good. All right, moving on to J. The board recommends the Common Council directs OPD to explore avenues to provide public service initiatives to populations in need when needed, including strengthening partnerships with community and social service providers. And go ahead, Luke.
So through the editing process, this tied in closely with one of the recommendations for future board. And this is something that a lieutenant in the subcommittee talked about at length, of getting together community partners into forming a resources board. Lieutenant, if you know what I'm talking about, if I'm being clear, would you mind talking about that for a minute, kind of your idea? Because I thought it was a really good idea.
So this is something I've actually was trying to start working on over a year ago. Currently have a meeting set with Department of Social Services, Mental Health, the Fire Department, and Probation for Thursday at 11 to discuss the framework of a community solutions board, where we have a very open understanding of what it is each individual agency is able to bring to the table, and be able to maybe fuse some services, such as taking some of the mental health arrests that we make and making immediate referrals through our paperwork to mental health, and assisting mental health and Department of Social Services to do their job and be more of their eyes on the street level for issues that have arise or continue to arise within the community. So this Thursday at 11, I'll have a bit more of a clearer idea of, what our what that group's going to look like, and if that's going to be a feasibility for us to be able to make it a permanent thing.
Good. Okay, so it would seem that this is something that not only is being pursued, but that you're pretty proud of the effort, Chief. And so what I would suggest is that we could pretty much adopt this verbiage as written. Go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say, I did my best in my meeting with the chief to get this all written down, and I believe the kind of the model for it, or a rough description of what he said, is in the appendix. I can't remember which board it is. Let me see if I can scroll down here. I believe it is number 4, the fourth proposal there, which ties in directly with what the chief was talking about. It should be the very last written thing in the report on page 18.
Very good. So in any case, what I would suggest is that reference to the appendix aside, that we may be able to take this verbiage pretty much as is. Does that sound about right? And so I would move that we do.
I would second.
Okay. Discussion, all in favor? Take your choice. Len, you're muted.
So Luke, you're saying the language for this recommendation is on page 18, and it's the last, so proposal number 4?
Sorry, Len, I had a couple windows open trying to keep track. I believe that's the right one.
I don't, that's talking about diversity
That
of
might, wait a
officers.
minute, that might not be it. I'm sorry, I might have misled you a little bit. Where is it? 1 second.
Is it proposal 4 on page 18?
That's what I just said, Mark. I don't think it's the right one.
So
Well,
I think it is, because it's talking about developing a board that includes resource professionals, representatives from the community, relevant non-governmental organizations, the colleges, DOL, and identifies. Oh, I see why. Okay. I think the second part is what it's talking about. The board will also develop a framework for interdepartmental cooperation and aligned services to best serve the community with members of the above mentioned organization. So it's, I think it's the second part that is the relevant to this particular point.
Mhm.
So the last sentence there.
So one of the things I just want to add in here is that the organizations that I'm looking at now are the main service providers that we're concerned with being mental health, social services, some justice involved persons, and the fire department, simply because they're under the umbrella of public safety within the community. There will be discussion as to who we bring in additionally, and I think that there needs to be a liaison for not-for-profits because there's so many of them. We just need to figure out how we're not duplicating efforts. So that's my concern, and I'm trying to start with a core group and expand it out from there, because you know these panels can grow to the point where they're uncontrollable, and I want to avoid that.
I was thinking the same thing, Lieutenant. That's why I kind of left that last sentence vague, just to ensure that we weren't missing anything or tying ourselves down if something else came up.
Chris, could you maybe at a later date, maybe our next meeting, give us the wording so that we have all of these agencies listed for this recommendation? I think you have the essence of where you want to go with the stakeholders, and we just need to have that final verbiage.
When I speak to them on Thursday, my goal is to come up with kind of if I can get everybody on board to turn this into a permanent thing, we'll come up with a mission statement and figure out where we're going to head from here. But I don't know of any individual agency that's doing this currently.
Right. So, Chair, if you don't mind, could we just put this one on hold until next week? It sounds as though the police chief is going to have a meeting this week, and we could get some more definitive verbiage to complete this recommendation out, so we could actually have the name of this community. Would you call it again, Chris? Community what board?
Panel on Community Solutions.
Panel of Community Solutions.
I'm fine with that. Luke, Dave, go ahead.
And I'm writing this down. Sorry. 'Cause I'll forget it. Chris, I was just going to suggest when you're developing this group, find a way, and I'm not sure how to do this, but find a way to somehow include the school district locally, because there's already a social service component in our schools now, and I think there's even if the tie-in is with the social services that work in the schools, so they're aware of that mass community there, because they're also going to know the community issues through the kids and the families. And of course, as those kids get older, and they're going to be a wealth of information for the group.
One of the things that we've been doing, and I don't know if they're doing it elsewhere, but I know that we've asked within our district for other law enforcement agencies, is notifying the schools of any involvement that we have with, let's say, parents and the children happen to be present, so that the schools are aware of that. So we've been working on, some fusion of services, us being the eyes to report back. So, for instance, if a child hasn't slept, your school knows about it because, they get at least some idea of what occurred at the house, and they're able to address it directly with the student themselves. So we do have some connection there already, but I would certainly be looking to strengthen that as well.
Yeah, and Tom Brindley may be a help with you of identifying who would be best for that too. So
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yep.
All right. So then we will come back to this next week, and Chief, you'll provide us that additional information.
Will do.
All right, thanks an awful lot. All right, so we move now to K. The board recommends that the Common Council advocate for greater mental health resources, working with groups such as the Otsego County Mental Health to make resources available for officers, access on demand. If resources are unavailable, OPD and the city should consider advocating for county, state, and federal aid for the individuals suffering from mental health crises, including substance abuse. I'm wondering, Katie, if this is something that we need to hear from you on as well. I don't know.
Well, sure. So in general, the city has an EAP program. It's an employee assistance program, which is free, confidential, on-demand counseling service. We have a really great local resource that we use. It's Dr. Sally George. She's very skilled and versed with EAP program requirements. She's generally very readily available and responsive. I know that if there's been issues that come up, even if they're off hours or off, on the weekend, I mean, she's only an email or a text away, and she's very available. I find sometimes that people are reluctant to use her because I think that there's, I think there's somewhat of a stigma against, mental health and counseling in general, not necessarily with the police department, but just in general. I think a lot of people are reluctant to actually use or ask for help when it's needed. And that's something that a perception that we try to correct at every possible juncture. What I like about Sally is, in addition to her just being generally available and helpful, she has a great network of resources. Whereas if we have an employee who contacts her, she's the first to say, listen, this is not my area of expertise. I know another clinician, another practitioner who can help you. So I do think that we provide a pretty good baseline mental health support service as it is. But again, I think as with many things, it can certainly be improved upon.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'll tell you, this is a subjective thing, I think, but my concern here is something that I've found in a couple of these recommendations, is that the recommendation advocates for greater mental health resources or policies that are above and beyond. So there is this, kind of vague and subjective sense of where we should be going, as opposed to something that's very specific. That, I'm just going to put that out there. That is a concern when we are then providing a plan to council. It really needs to be very specific. Go ahead, Luke.
That's one of the things we've run into. At times there have been contradictory expectations with this report. There have been times where we've gotten into policy and we're told not to go into policy or procedure, and vice versa, where it hasn't been specific enough. So where you find that the areas aren't specific is because we were steered away from writing it in specifics to give council as much ability and as well as legal to give them a chance to look at it as much as possible. So I think that might be where that confusion's coming from.
That's fair. That's fair. I appreciate that. That said, though, Chief, you've had an opportunity to read this and listen to this conversation. Do you have any input on this?
I just have to get back to where we were.
We're on K in that section. And this is the recommendation for greater mental health resources.
Okay, so I think one part of it is that it focuses on the police department as a whole, which I think we've done a fair hand with making services available, not only through EAP, but some trauma specialists. The other part of it is for the general public, and I'm working on a program with Otsego County Mental Health where we have, we're working on getting a digital, like a tablet device to be able to have mental health professionals meet with people in crisis without actually having the crisis person right there. They're right there, but they're on a tablet. This is a new program. I don't know how it's going to work out, but we're up to trying anything. So again, this goes back to the committee on, or the panel on community solutions. I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation where we try to exploit as much as possible the services that are available to us, but we really need to bring the social service and mental health professionals in so that we have a better idea of what our capabilities are and where we may be able to further assist each other.
So here's my recommendation, and it's just a slight modification, and that would be that the board recommends that the common council, that OPD continues to, I have to stop. I'll have to rewrite this, but one of the things that I've done throughout the rewriting of these recommendations is to remove the board recommends that the council does such and such, rather saying OPD should do such and such. And what I would suggest is OPD continue to advocate, or rather pursue greater mental health resources, including, so maybe pursue is a better word. You're already doing it, Chief, as best as I can see. And I guess what we're saying is keep on keeping on.
Yeah, so this is also meant to cover from a council perspective. Some of these things are out of the hand of OPD, some of them are out of the hand of the council, state legislature, some of them, that's why the advocacy piece is there.
Right.
To give the board as well as the council the wiggle room to apply for resources. So this is written in here, for example, once the panel is established and gets going, if OPD, if Otsego Mental Health needs more resources, needs more funding, that kind of gives us the mandate to go forward and apply for grants, to look for grants, to in some cases, if it comes to lobbying either Delgado or our representatives in the state Senate or state assembly, if it comes to applying for those kind of resources, that's kind of where that advocacy piece comes in. Because again, there are some things that are so big that the common council, we can do our best, but sometimes we're limited by our budget. So kind of going forward, looking for resources in terms of grant monies, in terms of whatever else might be applicable to whatever what future boards deem necessary that we might not necessarily have access to at the moment.
Your point's well taken. So, and that's why I stumbled there as we were telling OPD needs to do this, OPD needs to do that. In this particular instance, we're recommending that the common council advocates as opposed to OPD to such and such.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've wasted 3 of your minutes, maybe 4. So with that, do we have a recommendation to take this as we see it, or do we want to do something with it?
I would motion to take it as we see it. You know, given that with the understanding that as this panel gets together, explores their needs and their capabilities, you know, ultimately the buck stops with the council on a lot of things, and I think we have to hold our own feet to the fire to ensure that we're pushing through and ensuring that we're responding to community needs and wants. So I think this in a way helps hold our feet to the fire.
All right, so Luke, you're making the motion that we accept this as written. Do we have a second? Len, that was a second. And all in favor? Okay. Okay, we are moving on to race relations, which is the third chapter of 5 here. And our first, which is A, is something, in fact, both A and C, we know are going to be something that council is going to need to weigh in on heavily. But we've also indicated in our conversation, in our first conversation, that we would also have the discussion here. So with that, this board recommends the Common Council establish a review process, perhaps through a future oversight board, to examine the reason behind the disproportionately high levels of arrest of persons of color and implement procedures with council and community input to remedy any identified or contributory issues.
You said, Mark, your recommendation was to bring this before the full council?
That was our recommendation when we met in our
Yes.
organizational meeting, that we bring it before full council, but we would also weigh in on, there were 2 of these in which we intended to both weigh in and bring to council.
I had this as not going to the full council. I thought we had this as looking for more information. I have it down as something that we're bringing to the lieutenant and Katie. You guys didn't have that?
In that case, we have them here. I've got something else indicated here.
I have the same thing as Dave. I had it highlighted that it would go to Katie and Chris.
All right, so let's.
The reason might be, one of the questions, at least I had, was what are the levels?
Mhm.
Because they're not in this paragraph. So it was
Right.
the levels are saying that the minority population in Oneonta is 14%, which but we don't know what the arrest levels are.
This is something that I'm currently working on. If you don't mind me interjecting.
Oh, please.
So this is an interesting phenomenon. I've been looking at the numbers. And I have a bit of a theory on this that I have to vet out a little bit more. But in any population, what we're dealing with is really 1% of the population responsible for many of our contacts. And in some instances, we had people responsible for like 90% of a single crime category for one person. For example, last year for car larcenies, we had one person that we suspected was responsible for over 50 car larcenies, just entering a vehicle and stealing stuff out of it. That person, I think, was arrested over 20 times in just the summer. So I think we're facing a similar situation here where we have a very small, finite group of people responsible for the bulk of law enforcement contacts. And I am working on trying to hash that out and see if I can make any sense of it. But that's, on the one side, it doesn't really get, if you're looking at the 2 demographics, it gets paid much less attention on one side than on the other. So I'm going to try to get something put together so that we have a better understanding, because it is an interesting, it's interesting to me because we just simply don't arrest that many minorities here, but we do arrest some for multiple instances.
Go ahead, Lynn. You're muted.
Well, I was like Chris, and I mentioned this earlier on in, I believe, our first meetings, that I found the statistical data provided by the CAB of interest, because that's what I also looked at, was that the percentage of population, people of color, was dramatically low, but yet number of incidences was substantially high. And so I wondered if it was, does that represent multiple people, or is that just a smaller group doing more? And so I'd like to have the police chief review that, because that does take us back up to section 1, recommendation E, where OPD will work on the IBRS used for statistical data link from the FBI to our webpage. I think those two recommendations will kind of tie in together. We let it, if we let the police chief do his research.
So one of the bits that has stuck out for me in this particular recommendation is the future oversight board, which I would imagine would be mayor or council decision, I would guess.
I think that's something that we would be discussing. I think it would be, I mean, this is in reference to something that is in another section of establishing a community board. So how that's established, whether that's similar to the commissions we have in the city, whether it's like the zoning board, is yet to be determined by this subcommittee.
All right, so let me just get a sense of the group. Is this something that you, the committee, feels is in the purview of our committee to recommend the creation of an oversight board? Or not?
I think it's absolutely in our purview.
Absolutely.
If we want to recommend that. I mean, that's what we're here about, is make recommendations
On the same
or
page. All right, yeah.
non-recommendations to the council.
Okay. Just again, want to make sure we're all on the same page then. Okay. So where do we go with this?
Well, I mean, this could, I mean, this may have already been said, but if you're narrowing down the focus of A, it could be just a question of, do we recommend an oversight board or not? Because the lieutenant's research could take a while before he gets that data together, and then he may want to be interpreting that with either this board or the advisory board or the council or whoever, to tease out what needs to be teased out and to determine if there's an issue there, and what level of issue it could be.
Let me go to Luke.
I'm just wondering if this might be a more productive conversation, and not, again, not to push anything off, but for a future meeting when we discuss exactly what the oversight board would look like, this might be part of that conversation. It might make more sense to talk about it there, because this will probably, I would imagine, definitely be part of that conversation.
Len?
So I read this recommendation as they want their own standalone board for the disproportionately high levels of arrest of people of color and implement procedures with counsel and community input to remedy and identify or contributory issues. This is another board, not an overall board that you guys are just describing. That's how, for me, I take this recommendation. It's a standalone.
Right, and that's why I'm recommending maybe we wait until the day we talk about putting together a larger board. That way we don't have like 5 or 6 smaller boards together, and this could be kind of tied into that conversation of establishing that one board or one commissioner or whatever label we want to add to it. That would be my suggestion. Again, because your same concern, Len. I don't know how productive it would be if we had 4, 5, 6, 7, however many smaller sub boards going forward with this. I think it would probably be more productive to put this into the conversation in the context of putting that together.
I think that, go ahead, Dave.
Couldn't this also be looked at, this future board? I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily disagree with Len on that. When I reread it again, couldn't this be something that the Commission on Community Relations and Human Rights deals with?
I'm
I've
leaning
never
that way
attended a
myself,
meeting.
Dave.
Luke, you're the liaison for that group, correct? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
I have to admit, I've never attended one of their meetings, and I know that they're involved with some events, but maybe we need to table this while we have a discussion at some point, or rather than table it, we recommend that this, within a certain time period, that this is discussed with this group, the community relations and human rights group, to see if that's something they would take on. I mean, we could go with this any direction here. It could be referring this back to the council to decide to do what to do with, and then the 8 of us decide where we want to go with it. But I don't know that we necessarily, it could either go with the current committee, or it could potentially be put forward to one of the advisory boards, that if we look to do an advisory board, which is, the proposals back in Appendix 2, Citizens Advisory Board or Community Advisory Board. I think it could go either way, but I would steer more toward the human rights group right now.
So my suggestion is that we start to accrue and accumulate all of the various charges of this advisory board that is mentioned, I think, for the first time here, and we start to see, what exactly they're being asked to do, and then with that information, we may be able to bring some people to this conversation. Specifically, maybe the chair of your commission, Luke, bring them to the table. But I'm with Len. I'm with Dave. I think I'm with you as well, Luke. We don't want to have 16 different boards. We want to have, if there's a board or outside commission, that they know exactly what their tasks are, and that the lieutenant knows exactly what he's dealing with in terms of oversight.
And I will just say that the chair of the commission was heavily involved. She was a subcommittee chair for this. I have a good working relationship with her. I'm happy to talk with her. And we also have our next meeting on Thursday. So I will think about an appropriate way to talk about this at the meeting. I don't want to put anybody on the spot or talk about her ahead of time. But if it's all right with you folks, I'm happy to talk to her about bringing this forward to the commission and seeing if we can take that on.
Luke, I think it's important, though. What I'm saying is, as we really push through this document and really examine line by line, we'll start to get a pretty good sense of the specific tasks that are going to be asked of any advisory board, and with that, we can then give them a charge that is not vague at all, is very specific. The lieutenant knows what he's dealing with there. And then maybe it'll, when all is said and done, it will wind up suggesting that it's some other group or collection of folks rather than a currently standing commission, or maybe it'll suggest that it is, in fact, a currently standing board or commission. So go ahead, Len.
I also want to suggest that we already have elected officials in the Human Resource Committee, and that this might be an item for that committee to be examining also. So, Dave, I'm with you with the Human Rights Committee. I see them working on maybe the infancy stages of issues, and then it being taken over by the Human Resource Committee for finalization moving forward with this.
Yeah, I think that I would agree. I think, Luke, it could be good to discuss it with the commission, but I think ultimately it's really up to this committee here and then the full council to decide which direction we want to go with it. And just, I mean, we can assign it. And I would agree. I think we could have this discussion later, but maybe this committee wants to decide if this is something that we feel is important as a recommendation. We can put it on a timeline to assign it to the commission, and then they will, of course, after meeting with the lieutenant, getting the information, they could forward the recommendation to the human resources and further the discussion on up to the council when the time comes.
Go ahead, Len.
So Dave, to that point, what I was looking at though is as part of our recommendation to full council that the Human Rights Committee could identify potential issues and then send that over to Human Resource Committee as elected officers or officials to finalize the thought process and the action plan. That's kind of my recommendation.
Are you saying like without like having the information from lieutenant go to the council committee, the commission information go to the council committee to discuss? Because
yeah, I'm trying to think of the framework of how this recommendation would look down the road.
Well, it really is going to be based on the data that comes from the lieutenant. I think that's going to either make a discussion happen or, well, either way, it's going to make a discussion happen. It's just a matter of, it may be that we're overthinking it here, that we need to just decide, okay, if we feel this is important, we need to include it in the final recommendations and the timeline that we put on. We're not actually supposed to do the work. The council can decide, or we could come up with a timeline right here of who is going to do which section of this. And
So
I think
Dave,
yeah.
Right. So Dave, my suggestion is still the same, is that we're going to plow through this. We're going to see additional responsibilities that'll make themselves clear that this oversight group will need to take on. And with that, we'll have a clear idea of exactly what the charge is. I think, Luke, it's premature for you to discuss this with the Human Rights Commission at this moment because we don't know, in fact, whether they would be involved. I think we will come up with a workflow that will make sense as we push through this. And we have time. We're only in our second out of 8 meetings here. So we have time to get all the facts gathered. And then that will, once we have that in front of us, it'll, I think, be a little bit more crystal as to what our direction should be. John, are you trying to get in here?
Mhm.
We're gonna, all right, go ahead, John.
What do you mean?
No, go ahead, John. Are you
Never
trying-
mind.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like an open, I mean, you had said initially that
Right.
after each discussion, you would go to
That's
the person here, and you have failed to do that. And I'm just exercising what I thought was my option to
it is, John. Go
step
ahead.
in.
Go ahead.
I agree with you that I think this committee is doing some work about translating this document into recommendations. The council, the other 4 members of the council will need to know what these things are and have the time to discuss what is going to be implemented. To that, I agree that discussions outside of the work that this group is doing in terms of negotiating or feeling things out with other members of the advisory committees is premature and not being done with, it's a good catch on your part, Mark, to say, don't do that. That's not in your purview, I think, to start pre-setting or preparing the ground for your recommendations.
Thank you, John. And we'll see if we can get you more incorporated into the beginnings of the conversation following the chief and Katie. Go ahead, Dave.
Maybe what we should do is modify what's written in A to include what has been discussed so far. And that's the recommendation we're pushing forward to the full council on our timeline with an included timeline.
Do you have a suggestion, Dave, of what that might read like?
No.
Want to take a few minutes?
Oh, I would need a few minutes.
Take
for
a few
that,
minutes.
but
If you would, if you want to just take a couple of minutes. And I'll ask if there's, Katie, did you have anything that you need to bring to this, or?
Not if I have anything really particularly helpful to add at this point. I mean, I do have some opinions on an oversight board and the role and scope of that board in general. But I don't really know if now is the right time to really get into that, because it sounds like there's going to be additional council conversation, and maybe that would be the right time.
Mhm.
So thank you, but
Okay.
sorry, I'm no help.
No, you were perfectly useful, because it gave Dave some time to write.
I can continue droning. I mean, Dave doesn't look like he's done. I mean, so if you
I'm
want me to
not
go
done.
on.
But you go right on talking.
Go ahead. And I hear, and
Mark, is this something that maybe we could just leave, that we've identified 2 other organizations that might participate? Just leave those identified with this recommendation, then move on to recommendation B?
we
Right,
could,
Dave, I agree that we're looking at the Human Rights Committee and we're looking at the Human Resources Committee also to participate. We don't need
we
draft
don't,
language right now.
right, well, we don't know that though, Len, you know, respectfully, I feel like we don't know until we see everything in front of us, whether or not this is going to require some, you know, third party group or as opposed to a standing commission or committee. So I would suggest Dave looks like he's almost got this figured out. And once he does, we can probably vote on that and then move on to B. No pressure, Dave.
Yeah. This board recommends the Common Council establish a review process through a future oversight board, an existing city council committee, or city commission to examine the relationship that exists between, can't even read my own writing here, the arrests of persons of color I'm sorry, that behind the relationships that exist between the arrests of persons of color and the
Demographic.
minority population. Sorry, usually I do this with more time.
No worries.
And implement procedures with council and community input to remedy any identified or contributory issues.
For a rough draft, that's not bad.
Right.
Thank you, Len.
I'll move that better than I could come up with. So I'll move that rough draft that Dave just created on the whim.
Great. And Dave, you're going to second your own?
I'll second, yes, I'll second my own.
And any further discussion on this? Luke, you have anything to bring to it? Good. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. Okay. Moving on to B. The board recommends the Common Council encourage OPD to further develop ties with the Untitled Chapter of the NAACP. Is there?
Make a motion to accept this as is and move forward.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was nice. C, the board recommends the Common Council instruct OPD in conjunction with any necessary city staff members or departments to explore financial bonuses for multilingual officers while also developing relationships with minority police organizations for the mentorship of candidates, i.e. National Latino POA, National Black POA, National Asian POA, IAWP. And Chief, I want to give you a quick second to weigh in on what you are doing and what you might be able to do.
I think financial bonuses for multilingual officers are great. You know, that's a collective bargaining agreement thing, something that would have to go probably through Civil Service Commission as far as like offering that to new hires. Relationships with minority police organizations for mentorship of candidates. You know, I could reach out to them. I don't think any of them are local, but I'm sure they've got publications that I can draw from.
Katie, can I bring you into this as well? Given the fact that this is something that probably more falls to you than to the chief even.
So I think I'll take the first part of the recommendation regarding the multilingual officers.
Mhm.
Bilingual employees are governed by civil service law. So in order to have employees who are compensated or who are treated officially as bilingual employees, it's a process. I mean, it starts with the Civil Service Commission. We have to identify a need, and then we would have to administer a proficiency exam to prove that the employee actually is bilingual. So that would be something that we would have to work with the State Department of Civil Service on. And then, of course, as the lieutenant mentioned, it would be subject to negotiation in terms of the amount of a stipend. So it's certainly a doable process, but I think we would just want to be sure that it would be done in a meaningful way. You know, so for instance, you know, I'm bilingual in Irish Gaelic and American English. So would that really necessarily be a benefit to the community? I mean, should I receive a stipend for that if I were a police officer? I can't say that there really would necessarily be a need for that here. So I think that we would want to, you know, just carefully kind of examine the need, you know, perhaps identify what languages would be of value, and then kind of invoke the civil service process from there.
But you don't see an issue with it outside of those that you've stipulated. No.
No.
And I would say also, by the way, St. Oni's Day, that may your bilingual might work out for us. And Chief, you were saying that you don't have an issue in reaching out to various folks that you currently haven't, but you're aware of some opportunities.
I am, and we don't have any. I don't want to say we don't have any minority officers here because we do, and I don't want to make that mistake. But these are, I think, after the fact associations for the mentorship of current candidates. So that would be something I'd look to implement upon hiring, for instance.
Thank you, Chief. So there's really nothing that would tell us that we can't move this forward. Is there a motion to accept this language as it is, or do we want to modify things for in which case, for what reason? Any thoughts?
Well, I believe Katie gave us the reason why we might want to hold off on this one, because she's brought up a really good point. We need to identify which languages we actually would need within our community to identify that we need bilingual officers.
Right. Is that enough of a reason to, I mean, what we're not saying that this is something that is implemented tomorrow, but rather this is a recommendation that, you know, Katie would take as far as, you know, the work that she'd need to do, that the lieutenant would need to do in terms of the work that he needs to do in terms of outreach. But this is essentially the recommendation. Go ahead, Dave.
We want to just wordsmith this?
That's what I was going to offer to do.
Because you can say after city staff members or departments to evaluate the languages, the current languages spoken in the city of Oneonta, to explore financial bonuses for multilingual officers that may be necessary, while also developing relationships.
Mark, I have something written down if you'd like me to read it to see how it flows.
I think we all do. Go ahead.
Okay, so this board recommends the Common Council instruct OPD in conjunction with any necessary city staff members or departments to explore financial bonuses for multilingual officers based on the needs of the city. Is that too broad for this? I mean, I can't imagine we have a very large population of, no offense, Katie, and I think personally it's very cool you speak as a Murphy, Irish Gaelic. Is that too broad, saying based on the needs of the city?
I don't think so, but Dave, Lynn, your thoughts?
Based on the language needs of the city.
Let's see, based on the linguists. You think linguistic or language?
I think language is fine.
Okay.
Lynn, you have any?
Don't overproduce it.
Too late.
So after
Hey,
multilingual officers, I have based on the language needs of the city.
Mhm. Katie.
Sorry, just one other thing I wanted to mention for your consideration. While I understand, the importance of having officers, on scene who are bilingual, and another option that we may want to consider is somehow incorporating like an LEP language line resource or something like that into the department. So I'm the city's Title VI coordinator for OPT, and part of our federal funding for our transit agency is dependent upon our compliance with Title VI, which is, the 1964 Civil Rights Act about, not discriminating against people for national origin, and not providing sufficient language resources to people of, limited English proficiency is seen as a form of national origin discrimination. So one thing that I worked on in OPT's plan was a service, it's a paid, subscription service where you can literally within, 2 to 3 minutes get someone on the phone. I mean, granted, it's on the phone, you're not right there, present, but you can get somebody on the phone who speaks pretty much any language, as needed. So we may want to consider, just as with a broader scope, and maybe a little bit of a more economical option, considering like a language line or an LEP line or something like that, if it's truly a concern. So just another option.
It's a good.
Yeah, and also along those lines, using technology to our advantage, there are apps that we can get that the individual could speak, and it's identified in English.
Yeah,
So-
Google's pretty good.
Yeah, so frankly, they're all getting good. So maybe we tack on to the end of what you've written there, Luke, and or. The use of a language resource such as an LEP line or other technologies.
I think I need this read back to me
Mhm.
Okay, 1 second.
when it's all done.
Alrighty. All right. So the full recommendation reads as follows. This board recommends the Common Council instruct OPD in conjunction with any necessary city staff members or departments to explore financial bonuses for multilingual officers based on the language needs of the city, while also developing relationships with minority police organizations for mentorship of candidates, i.e., etc., and or the use of language resources such as an LEP line or written technologies. Did I get everything?
Sounds right.
I was trying to type as things were going.
I'm not sure about written tech. Was it written technologies you wrote?
I admit, I was trying to catch up, and there was a
No worries, of course.
the very last thing that either you or Dave said.
Maybe just other technologies.
Okay.
Other technologies.
Yeah, it didn't sound right, but I don't. Okay, that looks better.
Yeah. All right. Do we have a motion to accept Luke's revision? Dave, followed by Lynn. All in favor?
Aye.
So there we go. All right.
Mark, I'll send this out to you right as soon as we finish.
Appreciate that very much. Although I have been spoiled by YouTube, to tell you the truth.
Hey, can I add something that, I mean, I don't want to open up a rabbit hole of a discussion again, but I just want to point something out with everything that we're discussing here in this.
Mhm.
Going back to our initial part of today's discussion on H, Chris, talking about policies and procedures and going above and beyond
Mhm.
best practice. Maybe what we're going to end up defining is things that come out of this, that any adjustments that we make, maybe that what that is, some of those may be the above and beyond. It's just not written into OPD best practice or policies and procedures. It may be written somewhere else. So in some ways, I feel like we're achieving the idea behind H to begin with. So
I'll go down that rabbit hole. I think that's what it winds up being something that we can just reference via footnote.
yeah.
Good, terrific. So we move on to E in section 3, and that is this board recommends the Common Council develop a policy on recruitment of officers to any extent permitted by current law that best reflects the diversity in the city of Oneonta, whether that is recruiting from the city itself or from areas with similar demographics. And Katie, I'm going to want to go right to you with this.
I think this kind of falls into the bucket of, we try to do all we can with the limited resources that we have, but we certainly recognize that there's always room for improvement. So, I mean, do you care to hear what we do now to recruit officers? I mean, do you want to get into that? Okay, David shaking his head. Okay. So, I mean, we've tried to get creative in terms of, kind of trying to recruit a more diverse applicant pool. We've worked closely with Job Corps. The Civil Service Commission actually in this last recruitment waived the application fee for the exam for any Job Corps student who wanted to take the exam. We didn't have one person take us up on the offer. So that was a little disappointing. I've attended, and personnel assistant Dave in my office has also attended college recruitment and other fairs. And we just tend to, with the local colleges, not really necessarily get a ton of interest. So I'm clearly doing something wrong. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I've done pretty much everything I can generally think of as an HR person. So I'm certainly open to suggestions, but I do think we've tried to do some, pretty creative things.
Sure. Jake?
I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Katie said, in that one of the obstacles that we have is that the test doesn't open. Katie, when does the sign up start?
So typically the test is held on the new schedule, which has been for the last 3 years. It's held annually in September. So we are primarily doing most of our recruitment over the summer, which is tough because the colleges are out of session.
And we don't have exam announcements that we can bring to job fairs with us to say, hey, here, sign up. This is the exam announcement, because they come out after, the May job fair cycle. So that's a challenge for us that's created artificially through the state.
I also think it was interesting feedback to hear. I spoke with a colleague at Hartwick College who, we were talking about it, and I said, what are we doing wrong? It was Biama, Charles, the chair of the committee. And I said, what am I doing wrong? And she said that honestly, until and unless we can be competitive in our jobs with more metropolitan areas where you have more diversity, she said that she thinks it's going to be kind of a tough sell to get, a more diverse applicant pool. I think that this might come up in another recommendation, but it's also really tough to recruit a diverse applicant pool to take a test, which, from which a list is established, which civil service law gives us no ability to consider diversity in hiring. I mean, literally all we can consider when you hire a candidate in a competitive class job in New York State based on the rigidity of civil service law is how did they score on the test? So I think even if we were able to recruit a more diverse applicant pool, which would certainly be wonderful, and I'm not saying we shouldn't attempt to do that, but as it stands, the archaic civil service process kind of hamstrings us into only hiring people based on where they score on the test. So even if we're able to recruit a diverse applicant pool, there's no guarantee we're going to be able to hire those folks. So that's kind of, my challenge and my frustration with it.
So, John Rafter, as I have ignored you, and I'm sorry about that, if there's something that you want to throw in here quickly before we move on.
I think Katie's last point is excellent, that the call it archaic or behind the times, but the civil service law governs the hiring of people. So I think that the choices we have about where we recruit or how we do these things is going to be immersed a bit by the fact that, not immersed, but blocked by what the civil service law or the state law permits and does not permit in terms of flexible, creative hiring.
Thank you, John. All right, Luke.
This was a tough one in working with the commission, because I think this might fall under an instance where the council, in whatever capacity it can, advocate to the state in amending the civil service law, or at least the test in this fashion. Studies show that test takers aren't always the best at their jobs, and people that are best at their jobs aren't always test takers. Again, kind of with that caveat earlier on, some of these recommendations are beyond our power to implement, which is why the caveat at the beginning says that the council will do within its power to uphold the spirit of these recommendations.
Okay, so my recommendation is that we just modify the sentence a little bit to read: the board recommends that the Common Council continues development of policies on recruitment of officers. It's clearly something that you're engaged in, you're thinking about all the time, Katie, so there's no reason to think that we need to tell you to do what you're doing it. And that's going to continue to be something that evolves over time as the options present themselves through your conversations with people and through that which you learned. So that would be the suggestion I would make, is that we just modify that sentence. Thoughts? Yes, Dave.
Just one thing I want to add about civil service, as frustrating it as civil service is, it's what helped bring us out of Tammany Hall-like atmosphere. And if we got rid of civil service altogether, I think we could very well find ourselves with even less diversity, depending on who's in charge or in what region. I mean, who knows where you'd be going with it. So I think I would agree with adding the wordsmithing you did to this. And I think that Katie and Dave do the best job that they possibly are able to with recruiting.
And for what it's worth, B, which has gone to our legal minds, is the one that is the recommendation that is the first of several that talks about civil service process, and we've already identified that as a legal opinion that's required. So with that, the board recommending, we're going to take a vote on that, I guess. I'll make the motion that we adopt with that modification of verbiage. Do I have a second? Dave. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, very good. Okay, and we will take it to the civilian oversight and community involvement. And Dave and Len, let me just check to see if what you had 4A is the same as what I had 4A, which I had written that this was a council concern, but we've already now talked about the fact that we are going to probably want to be recommending of a board. Do we simply want to come back to this? Do we want to just leave it alone, leave it for council?
I don't see where we're ready to make our way in on this one yet.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And for, again, those that are following along on YouTube, it's this board strongly recommends that the Common Council considers the creation of a standing oversight and advisory board. So we will come back to that as we get a better handle on what that need might be and what the specifics may be as well. Sounds right to everybody? All agreed? Aye.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, that's fine. Then good. Moving on to C. This board recommends that OPD work to strengthen ties with the many organizations in Oneonta who work on behalf of historically marginalized groups. These groups include, but not limited to, the Oneonta Commission on Community Relations and Human Rights, the Oneonta Pride Alliance, NAACP, and others. Earning trust from many organizations is essential and necessary in building a safer community. This process should include regular meetings, town halls, and assistance in drafting policies that aid OPD better and more equitably in policing the city. And Chief, I have a sense that you can speak to this just with what you're doing now.
Yeah, and one of the things, again, that this panel I'm working on, I want to include for certain is the NAACP. Now, one of the reasons they haven't put in as the core group is because the core group has got, because they're working professionals, there's some confidentiality issues that I have to overcome with HIPAA and dissemination of information. So these groups are legally required to maintain confidentiality. And when we're talking about civilian groups like that, there's not the same requirements, but I want to have them in on the panel as stakeholders with the option of being able to go into like an executive session so we can discuss individual issues and carry that stuff and maintain that accountability and confidentiality is necessary. So that's something that I'm looking into.
Okay. Go ahead, Len.
Oh, Chris, along those lines, you're not going to open up the panel of community solution public though, right? For attendance, this is going to be a closed meeting.
I don't know how we're going to structure it yet. I mean, clearly there's going to be issues where we're going to be discussing individuals. So I don't know if that's going to be a public portion of it. But the groups that we're talking about here, Oneonta Pride Alliance, NAACP, these are civilian groups that don't have the same legal requirements as we do. So if we're going to bring them in, it would be open to them right as civilians. So as far as open meetings go, I don't know if that's going to be someplace where we're going to want to have, they'll have the ability to talk to, let's say if there's a community issue that can be carried up by the NAACP or Pride Alliance to the panel, right? Through their organization to the panel, not necessarily a public group. Again, I want to maintain the integrity of this and make sure that it's functioning and isn't overwhelmed with, I don't want to turn it into an out of control panel kind of discussion thing.
Right. And so the minutes though would be obviously approved by this group, which will be sensitive to the personal information that you're going to be going over, but the minutes itself could be put out there on the city's website.
Potentially.
Right. So then it gives that transparency that the CAB was looking for. So that's trying to find some common ground there.
And if I heard you right, Chief, first of all, this is you don't know yet. You'll know when you know.
Yeah, because again, this is this is a big ask for people to commit to, being involved in this process, but I think it'll be mutually beneficial for everybody. But I still have to gauge the interest.
Right. But the spirit, and this is the thing that we just want to, keep crystal, is that the spirit of and intent of the CAB is that we have a maximum of transparency. So within the context of all of that's already been discussed, you'll make determinations as to what you could put out in front of public and what you need to go into as quote unquote executive session on, and that would rule the day. I mean, that would be the mode that you follow for all of this. And so I think your concern, Len, is a good one. I think again that, Chief, as you start to really understand what it is that you've been doing and who you're going to be doing it with and what the parameters are, as long as we keep the focus on transparency I think all will be good. So getting back to Dave, go ahead. You're muted, Dave.
Can I tweak a couple of these sentences? Because it didn't read right to me. So what I'd like to change is, this board recommends that OPD work to strengthen ties with the many organizations in Oneonta who work on behalf of historically marginalized populations, period.
Yeah.
These organizations include, but are not limited to, and then on. It just makes more sense instead of the way it looked like it wasn't people that were marginalized, it was groups that are marginalized. And then it went on to look like it was groups, like these specific groups themselves, not the individuals in it. So it's a minor thing, but.
And I would just like to take out the town halls. Obviously they're going to have regular meetings, so I like that last sentence for me. I would just strike.
Strike town halls.
No, strike the entire last.
Entire sentence. So that sentence is this process from that point on. The
Correct.
Sentence.
Because I think the way that Dave just read that really gives the essence of that recommendation.
Luke, you have any objection to that?
I think so long as it's written in a way that ensures transparency. I believe that's the heart of this last sentence, is that people are able to see what's going on. Of course, if there is executive session level things, that's one thing. But I think the heart of this last sentence here is ensuring there's transparency and accessibility to that information.
Right. Okay. And
I don't know that I agree with keeping that. I don't know that I agree with that last sentence the way it's written right now, because it's. I feel like on some level it's putting the cart before the horse, and also, there's the piece that we discussed earlier about I don't. It doesn't sit with me, and it's. Even if it's something as simple as the word regular, if you keep it in there, Luke, then we have to you're asking the OPD to establish a literal regular meeting with all these groups, and
right, Dave. That's why I was saying the spirit of it is transparency. So if this is putting the cart before the horse, ensuring that we write it in a way that's ensuring transparency. That might not be the most effective way to do it. Might not be a town hall or public meeting, but I think that's the spirit of it. So that's what I was trying to say.
Maybe it should be, the process should include regular, or should include oh, I'm not wordsmithing this right now.
Can we just say that the results will be posted on a quarterly basis? I mean, Chris, are you going to meet quarterly or annually, or?
Well, he doesn't know that though.
Right, that's what I'm getting. We're
Well,
trying to get finality to this.
I think we need to be more general though, Len.
Correct.
In my opinion.
all right.
Right.
So how about this? How about that? Earn trust from many organizations. So this is the sentence that precedes the last sentence. Earning trust from many organizations is essential and necessary to building a safer community through a commitment to transparency.
Say that again, Mark.
I'm just adding a clause at the
But what is the transparency, Mark, in that sentence that you just read? What's the transparency?
I think that's to be TBA. You know, I mean, we
Okay.
you know, we don't know, but I think in the spirit of this, what we're saying is, look, are you being as transparent as you can be?
Mhm.
So we kind of put the marker out there that that's what our expectation is. Are you good with that? Chief?
Maybe we're just overthinking this, because the key word of this whole paragraph is that we recommend that OPD work to strengthen ties with the many organizations in Oneonta who work on behalf of historically marginalized populations.
And read it.
And that includes
You could almost kill it there, because in
You
fact,
could kill it. Yeah.
rather than starting to identify groups that, I mean, we have the
Right.
Oneonta for Equality, we have all these other groups that are, forming ad hoc groups and other more formalized groups. And, rather than saying this group and this group and this group, we just kill it right after that first sentence.
Right.
You just adjust
I
it.
would keep the second sentence in.
Would you?
Yeah,
These groups include?
yeah.
All right. Wouldn't be the first time I was outvoted.
I
But
don't
then
know, Mark. Mark, I'm with you. I don't know if you necessarily have to list them all because they're there. And
Well, you know what? The and others,
and others should be out.
you say,
Remove and others, because it says, should these groups include but are not limited to,
okay.
and so it's a redundant statement.
I'm okay with that. So, Len, where are you at with that? You're all right with that? Basically, what we're doing is we're and maybe even as importantly or more, Luke, this is your baby. If we put a period after the acronym NAACP, and then that's where we end that paragraph and that recommendation. Can you live with that?
oh, David added verbiage after NACP,
Did you, Dave?
He
but
did,
not
he did,
limited to.
right.
No, but are not limited to is in the beginning of the sentence.
Oh, in the beginning of it.
Yeah, because these organizations include but are not limited to Oneonta Commission of Community Relations and Human Rights, the Oneonta Pride Alliance, and the NAACP, period.
Okay.
And then Dave, didn't you have a ending clause with ensuring transparency?
That was me,
Well,
but,
well, at first, I mean, I go back and forth with this. I mean, we could add another sentence that's talking about transparency, but leaving it very broad instead of saying that you have regular meetings, town halls, et cetera,
with the
et cetera.
commitment to maximize.
Or we can assume that just the fact that they're working with the organizations who you want to be transparent with anyway is the transparency we're looking for.
Correct, especially since it included the Community Relations and Human Rights Commission.
This goes back to my point of how do we identify groups so that we're not duplicating efforts? And I think when we look at this, I think the Oneonta Commission of Community Relations and Human Rights, the chairperson should be involved in this as a stakeholder, because then they can go back and they can be the point of contact for all of those other groups. So managing who it is that gets, a seat at the table is going to be important so that we can minimize duplication of effort.
I agree. I think that commission, it may find themselves having, or pleasantly find themselves having more substantial work to do than they already have on their plate. But I think we're really going to end up, when this is all over, I think we're going to be utilizing that commission more than they're being utilized now.
In any event, though, we're looking at the identification of stakeholders from various organizations. This is what I was talking about. We're going to start to see what this advisory group is going to look like, and that may very well be, rather than that it gets handed off to one or another. We'll still figure it out. We're nowhere near knowing, but we're starting to get a little bit of a clearer picture. Are we adding any other verbiage? I had said something along the lines of with a commitment to maximum transparency. I can live with it or without it. We can simply say the fact that the police are meeting with groups like the NAACP and others are our best assurance of transparency. Either way.
I agree with Dave. I don't think we have to write out the transparency.
So that we are looking then at ending this at NAACP, period, correct? All right.
We could, hold on.
I would
Right.
just, I know it might sound redundant, but I also think, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me that we're writing out transparency. It just feels a bit off.
Dave?
Again, I think we're overthinking this
Mm.
and adding too much. Maybe after the word strengthen ties, we could put through regular contact.
I don't know that I would agree with that. I think, that doesn't suggest meetings and collaboration, regular contact. Sorry.
I just, on some level, I feel like if these groups are going to be working more closely with OPD, I mean, that in itself is regular contact and
I think we've got it with strengthening ties. You know what I'm saying? I think that infers that there are meetings, there's collaboration, there's conversation. Luke, or were you just adjusting your headphones? Yeah, you're muted.
unless we keep in the last sentence.
Just adjusting, sorry.
Go ahead.
Unless we keep in the last sentence and just say this process should include regular meetings in town halls as necessary.
But you
Yeah,
can't have town halls because they're gonna be talking about sensitive information.
Right.
Perhaps as appropriate.
Or even regular meetings. If we ended it with regular meetings as, would you say as appropriate? Or just regular meetings?
But that goes back to what Dave talked about earlier about identifying regular meetings.
Right. Right.
What's
Some of
regular?
this, David said, I think we're overthinking it a few times. And I'm absolutely on the same page as he is now. Where'd John go? Give him a shot at it. We've got, as it stands right now, because I really do feel like we are working this harder than we need to. The board recommends that OPD work to strengthen ties with the many organizations, many populations in Oneonta who work. No, I'm sorry.
So with the many organizations,
Many organizations in Oneonta who work on behalf of historically marginalized populations,
these organizations include,
but are not limited to the Oneonta Commission on Community Relations, Human Rights, the Oneonta Pride Alliance, NAACP. I kind of like it right there.
we want to leave it there. I mean, I'm okay with leaving it there.
Luke and his need, which I don't disagree with, about having the word transparency said in this paragraph. I feel like we can figure out a way to get that in. And again, I had suggested with a commitment to, transparency, just as the kind of a broad catch-all, and then, that will look like whatever it looks like.
Are we looking for transparency between what's said at the meetings? Is that what we're talking about?
Luke?
Let's say
I
if
think-
OPD has a meeting with NAACP about an issue, are we talking about the transparency between the meeting? Like, what are we talking about transparency?
Well, like I was thinking, and I would imagine that minutes, for example, of things that aren't confidential, like the NAACP has itself right now. So I'm a member, and I receive minutes from the NAACP.
Well, Luke, it may be that the NAACP, as far as strengthening ties, maybe that the NAACP is having a meeting and they invite the lieutenant to their meeting, so he can be there to answer some questions they have about some issue that's happening. So that may be an example of strengthening ties, or that the Commission of Community Relations and Human Rights at their regular monthly meeting, they may call the lieutenant to answer questions about something they have or an event coming up. So that could be part of strengthening ties. So I guess I think we're trying to wrap our arms around a word that we don't have a definition for succinctly here, when it may actually be built in to the first sentence.
All right.
I mean,
Okay with that,
I'm not 100% sold on that, but that's what I'm trying to think here, because we're having such a hard time with this.
Yeah, I agree, Dave, because when you step back and you read this, and as you were just giving your definition, that's what I was doing, and I brought in what you were saying. So we've zoned in collectively as a committee tonight that this is looking at one particular board, and that could be this panel of community solutions. But when you take it in the contents of what you were just saying, that OPD, by working to strengthen their ties, are going to Pride Alliance meetings when invited, the NAACP meetings when invited. And so that transparency will happen when those organizations invite, and they will have every legal right to say, well, you know what, we've invited them 7 times and they've never shown up. Or they could turn around and say, we invited them 7 times and they showed up every single time. So the transparency would be there by the fact that we've listed some organizations. They have every legal right to post.
And if it turns out that, let's say there was a meeting that was happening with the police chief, some issue came up. So the police chief invited the president of the NAACP and then president of Oneonta Pride Alliance to down to the police station to meet. If we're talking transparency that way, I see that becoming transparent by those 2 people going back to their groups, because they're going to have to report.
Right.
And it will be extremely transparent what was decided, what was discussed at that point. I don't see this as, well, I can't see it any other way.
Luke, it's really, we, at this point, I think we all know the investment you had in this to begin with, so we want to make sure that you're feeling all right about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you've made your arguments, and I think, I think that makes sense. And I don't want to wordsmith this to death. I know we've got a lot of work to go through still, and I think I know.
Right.
And I think there is a decent level of transparency and the way for people that are curious about what's going on to get it. If there's something.
I also think the most important thing out of that paragraph was talking about strengthening ties. So,
all right, with that,
just on a side note, Chris, if you don't mind me asking, how many times have you been invited to these particular groups meetings?
Or OPD invited?
Not all that regularly. I've had some invites. I don't know if I've ever said no to any. I think I've even cleared my schedule for a few, but we've met with the NAACP within the last year. I'm not a hard guy to find. So, anytime somebody wants to talk to me, my door's always open and my phone's always on. And if they can't get me, somebody knows where to get me. So I'm not that difficult to find.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let's see if we can get this one wrapped up then. And gosh,
Dave, you have the clearest. You're trying to get a clear context of this, Mark? I think Dave has it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's basically, we've got everything. I think I've got it, actually. The board recommends that OPD work to strengthen ties with the many organizations in Oneonta work on behalf of historically marginalized populations. These groups include, but are not limited to, the Oneonta Commission on Community Relations, Human Rights, the Oneonta Pride Alliance, and the NAACP, period. And that's what we have.
I'm okay with doing that. Even putting in earning trust from many organizations is essential and necessary. I think we should strike the last sentence, though.
Okay.
Based on our discussion already.
Yeah.
In building safer community, you all the way to the end of that sentence. Dave.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
All
I
right.
just think the last sentence is it changes the definition of the paragraph a little bit.
All right.
In
that case, I would move that we accept that recommendation as has been read, with the addition of that line up to and including safer community, period. Second, and that was Luke. All in favor? Aye, aye, aye. And that, I think, is probably going to do it for this meeting of the Cabrc, as we call it.
Good work, everyone.
We wanted to get 17 done. We got 10 done, with 3 things out of that 10 being moved to next week.
All right.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
So with that said, though, our game plan is to turn over our creation
June 1st.
to full council
Mhm.
at least 10 days before the June council meeting, correct?
Well, the 10 days is news to me.
Or you want me to reword that? Should our goal be as a committee to turn over our recommendations to full council at least 10 days prior to the June council meeting, so that at least we have 10 days so that we can be able to legally schedule maybe a special meeting to talk about this as a council.
All right, so that's
That would put us Friday, May 21st, which would technically be
Wouldn't we-
11 days, but
I mean, ultimately, Mark, I mean, I'm assuming that you weren't gonna get all the way down and craft this and then turn it over to the council. I mean, that's
No.
what John's been talking about this entire time.
No. We are going to provide the council, in my plan here, we're going to provide the council with, here's a document, here are our recommendations for timelines. We'll, you know, your point is well taken, although I find it very disturbing that we have lost 10 days on the period of time that I thought I was dealing with. But it is what it is. So go ahead, Dave.
Okay, tell me again, what was the date that Gary gave us?
I think we have
June
June.
1st.
Yeah.
Okay, so he asked us to have this done by June 1st. I say Len, this is my recommendation, is we go with the June 1st, not worry about the 10 days. I mean, if we're done way in advance, that's great.
Oh, absolutely. But
let's aim for June 1st being the date that we are done here and not worry about the 10 days. Because I think we may find that we're going to need as much time as possible.
I think we are going to, that's why if I seemed a little.
It was a good question.
But we all set a date of June 1st to have it ready on council's desk.
Yes.
In order for us to do that,
Yeah,
we
but
have to allow.
That's laying it on council's desk. If you want to do that, that doesn't mean, because I feel like if we're saying that we want it ready to be voted on, then June 1st isn't really the deadline. It's 10 days prior.
Council is the 15th, I guess, that month. I think the first is a Tuesday, and then.
So Dave, you're thinking that we can't have this document crafted and ready to go, fully discussed out amongst all the council by June 1st?
We may,
but I think we should look at, I don't want to look at our deadline as 10 days prior to June 1st. If we do it, that's great.
Right.
But I would say, let's in our minds know that June 1st is the deadline to be finished and email it, because then it's late.
Right. So if we follow that timeline, though, we will be well past our June 1st council passing the resolution. And
the deadline, June 1st,
that's how
the deadline to pass it.
Right. And as it was, we wound up with an extra 2 weeks based on, Mark Davies saying, could these guys have 2 more weeks? I don't think it's anything that is etched in any kind of stone. So I believe.
Why don't we clarify this tonight? Let's take a break for dinner. Let's clarify this tonight and make sure we're all on the same page.
Just to put my own point on it, this is going to be the process that takes the length of time it takes to do it right. There's a lot of folks that want to know that we did our best job with this. And so if we get it done early, if we get it done 10 days before, or more, that's great. let's bring it to council tonight and get, find out specifically when they expect this to be done. Do they expect to be done 10 days before the 1st, or do we have until the 1st, in fact? I might be surprised pleasantly by the fact that we get done, a couple of weeks before the deadline of the 1st, and that'd be great. But I also don't want to give anything short shrift here. Even the timeline.
I'm not, Mark, I'm
I-
not suggesting in
I'm
any
not suggesting-
shape or form to rush through this. And so I really don't want you to say that or
Right.
implement that I'm suggesting that. By no means am I suggesting that we shortchange through all this.
That's not
I'm
my.
just saying that we were given a timeline and that we need to allow the other council members an opportunity to weigh in on it.
Right. We'll talk to the mayor and council tonight about that timeline. And Len, under no circumstances was I suggesting that your intention was to do anything except the best possible job. We know that you're as committed to this as anybody is. But I also know that I wanted to do 17 things today, and we got 10 done. And 3 of them are being held over to next week. So we're going to have to move at the pace we move to get it done right. And we'll talk to the mayor and council tonight.
Okay.
If you're muted.
I gotta run.
Yep.
I'll see you guys.
I'll see you guys in a bit.
Very good.